welcome to Artego USA and the Beecher Group. This morning's topic that Dustin and Sebastian, who is under my name because of the Zoom confusion, but
Hi,
it is really
I'm Ann
Sebastian.
Valentine.
Don't call me for these questions. Anyway, I want to introduce these two wonderful men who are going to give you lots of tips on good gray coverage with its color, U up 2, and of course the Organic Beauty Fusion. So if you have any questions, write them in the chat and we will address them. So ready, guys?
Awesome. So Dustin, do you want to start out with you up to?
Sure. So I personally really like you up to if you're doing a really soft gray blending on someone that's under 20% gray that doesn't like to have a hard line of demarcation. I also really like it if you have somebody that's just doing a really subtle change and just really wants a slight amount of gray coverage. I mean, do you have any other thoughts, Sebastian, on that?
Well, I mean, of course, if we go by the book education, you up to when used with 3 Energizer, will cover gray for a client who's got 70% gray or less. So you can definitely get that with the 3 Energizer, but I tend to agree. I like it. I kind of manipulate it, and when I have those clients who have some gray through their hair, but they really like their gray to look like a highlight. One of the things I really love to do with you up to is mix the 1.8 Energizer and the 3 Energizer equal parts.
Mm-hmm.
So that way I'm not getting full gray coverage because I'm not going to the 3 Energizer, but I am getting some gray blending, some really good gray blending. And so let's say you have a client who's a level 6 and she's 50% gray. When I do that and I mix those two developers half and half, I'm still doing the normal ratio. So I'm still doing 1 part color, 2 parts developer. I'm just creating a new developer by mixing the 1.8 Energizer and the 3 Energizer. So just to make that clear. And then I still do the right ratio. But when I color that level 6 client who has 50% gray hair, her gray hairs tend to be somewhere between probably around a level 8, honestly. So now she looks like she's had a level 8 highlight in her hair. And like I have done the finest weave you've ever seen in your life because the natural gray disbursement is a lot finer than what we typically could do as humans.
So, I mean, definitely played with you up to quite a lot, and I have found if you're trying to really bend the rules to get better gray coverage, if that's your goal, I personally mix it equal parts instead of 2-to-1, and you do get a more saturated gray coverage. And I guess I would probably pick that on someone that doesn't want a lot of warmth. Because I do find that it is a little bit less warm than if you were to use its color in certain situations. And the line of demarcation is softer. And if that's what you're going for, that's another little thing I found behind the chair that does work.
Yeah, you mentioned to me when we were talking before that you had been doing it equal parts. When you do the equal parts, are you getting on level? Because that's something I've not done much.
I feel like you get more on level than if you do it 2-to-1 because I do feel like it's very translucent, more like a Shape DQ type product. So, like you said, if you put a 6 on, those grays look more like an 8.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you mix it equal parts, they're probably more like a 6.5. So you still get that dimensional color, but it's definitely a heavier coverage than the traditional 2-to-1.
So, and then back in the day, I don't think this is taught anymore, but just, people that like to break the rules, we used to actually mix its color and you up to no problem. And Anne remembers that, right?
I still teach that, yes.
Yeah, and so there are times if you want to get more coverage out of it as well. So there's so many things. That's one of the things I love about Artego, but it's also one of the most challenging things for stylists is I think manufacturers are trying to dumb down color. So they want to like be able to take people out of school, put them in a salon, they all do the same formula, they all do the same this. And honestly, it's like kind of robot. What I love about hair is that it's art. And as long as you're not doing something that's going to damage that person's scalp or health, something like that, it's really nice that our brand has a lot of things you can do. Kind of gives you control of your coverage, of the alkalinity, so many things we have control of. Sometimes it's overwhelming for new stylists, but you don't have to do that. You can stick with the rules, and that's what I recommend until you get really comfortable. And all those rules are working for you, and then start playing with some of the things like adding its color into you up to, and now you're creating a demi plus hybrid because you're putting some alkalinity, higher alkalinity into that you up to, so you can get different looks in your coverage, and then you're going to be able to create, coverage from very translucent to very opaque because we have everything you can manipulate our color to do all of it. So you don't need three different brands. I don't need shades for translucent and color confusion or whatever Redken calls it now for opaque coverage. All of those things. You don't need multiple different brands and different lines. And I've got so many stylists that are like, oh, I use Joico for this, and I use Matrix for that, and I use Redken for this. You don't really need to do it
Yeah.
anymore, and we save you money, so it's kind of like, why would you?
I
Also,
completely.
Sebastian, we always taught everybody you could add the U up to its color
Yep,
for helping to get more gray coverage because you're adding pigment or more vibrancy.
yep.
That was before your magic and my color reflex and all that, but still works.
What would like a typical formula be, Sebastian, if you were going to add you up to its color?
So
You,
I mean, you could use the um any of the shades that you wanted to add into your formulation. I had people who I went back and forth, and you might speak to this too, because honestly, some of that was even before my time, which has been 14 years, so
Mhm.
that's a long time ago. But I had people who taught that you put your its color and your its color developer in, and then you put in your you up to
Yep.
formula and your energizer, and you use the appropriate developer with them. I also had people who said they just use the regular developer across the board. They put the U up to and the its color in the bowl, and then they just used regular developer.
Mhm.
Well, have you heard both also, Anne?
It depends what you're doing. If you were adding its color to U up to, we use Energizer, whichever.
Yeah,
If you're adding the U up into its color, then we use the O2s.
yeah,
And we always said about no more than a ribbon inch.
yeah.
Sometimes you don't need that much even, but as just a quote unquote kind of measurement, that was a good amount to add.
okay.
And if we look to the chemistry of what the two different color lines, the MEA has that small amount of, or the MEA, the U up to has that small amount of monoethanolamine or MEA, where its color is ammonia. So when you're adding a small amount of the U up to your formula, you're getting a little bit more longevity in your alkalinity. So your coverage can be better, even so,
Mhm.
because you're opening that hair up even more for a little longer time.
All right, while we're on U up to, we have an question somebody doesn't know. They're asking about what an energizer is. So you
It,
might want to explain the two difference.
do you want to do that one,
Yes.
Dustin?
Yeah. So the Energizer is a dedicated developer for you up to, which is the demi-permanent color, and it comes in two strengths, 1.8 and a 3 volume, and it's the dedicated developer for you up to.
So your 1.8 is going to make it more true semi-demi, fade on tone, not cover gray. We don't recommend that for gray coverage. It will blend gray a little bit. When you want to go gray coverage, you're going to go to the 3 Energizer, which is technically a 10 volume, honestly.
Yeah.
But both those Energizers have thickeners in them. If you mix you up to with anything other than Energizer, it is too thin to pick up on a brush. But when you pick those energizers in there, it naturally thickens up for you to use it and makes it much easier to work with. And that 3 Energizer not only will give you gray coverage, like I said, you up to will cover gray if you have 70% or less gray, you can cover that gray with you up to and 3 Energizer. But it will also lift up to 1 level with 3 Energizer. So just know that, because if let's say you're highlighting somebody and you want to, tone over their hair, if you did it with 3 Energizer, you're going to break the base of that natural hair, and that's important to know. You're going to want to go down to that 1.8.
Mhm.
And this isn't about gray coverage so much, but just so you know what the Energizers are for.
Yeah, and I can add too, like I don't know if there's any L'Oreal users on here, but U Up 2 is very similar to Dia Richesse in the way that it works, and that if you use the Energizer 3, that you will get that up to 1 level of lift. So, I mean, I hope that answers some more questions for people that are maybe familiar with other manufacturers.
Sounds good. She said, thank you.
Yeah. So I guess let's get into its color. You know,
Okay.
kind of, I think, the golden child for gray coverage. I kind of wanted to stress, because I've gotten lots of questions, I think we all have, about gray coverage, just how important the application is for gray coverage, and its color being a very thick consistency, and making sure that you do very fine partings and very thick, heavy application, especially on really resistant gray hair. Because I've watched a couple of stylists, they're like, I'm not getting gray coverage. And they have this thick head of hair and they're mixing up 30 grams of color and 30 grams of developer and stretching it all over this head of hair. And they're like, well, I'm not getting gray coverage. And, if the color isn't thickly applied to that gray hair, you're not going to get gray coverage. And I think that's probably the biggest reason I see that stuff isn't covering gray.
So while we're talking about the things that we see are is causing our customers not get gray, my biggest thing that I see, and you're probably going to hate me for this, some of you, if you don't do this, but get a scale. Please get a scale. I've gone into salons. I actually had a salon I went into. 3 of the girls were loving the color. The other girl wanted to try it, so I left her a tube of color. She sends me a picture. She used a level 5, a 5NN in our line, and the picture showed the gray literally looked like an 8. And I was like, I don't know what that could have happened, because our 5NN is so pigmented. There's no way that it did that. Well, come to find out, she eyeballs her color. She doesn't weigh it. And I was like, okay, so let's talk about why this is it's important for all color lines, right? But it's extra important for us. We have 30% less alkalinity than most brands on the market. So what does alkalinity do? It opens that hair up. If you have resistant gray hair and you don't have any alkalinity, you're not getting pigments in that hair and you're not getting coverage. So what, as humans, when we put a solid color in the bowl, which typically stands up and is solid, and then you put your developer in and you're eyeballing it, we're typically always going to put more developer into that bowl than we are color, because when you eyeball it, the developer flattens out and it looks like less. So same thing happened with her. I stopped back by the salon and she said, oh, I'm really good at eyeballing it. I'm not going to get a scale. I said, if you'll do one thing for me, let me put a scale down facing me, put the bowl on it. And I said, and you eyeball it in there. If you get it right, I will give you $150 worth of free color. And she was like, okay. She did it. She was an ounce and a half more developer than she was supposed to have. So
Whoa.
going back, I was like, and this is why your gray coverage was a level 8, because you diluted all the pigment and you diluted the alkalinity, and then you wondered why you got no gray coverage. But those are things that I think it's really important. People get scared. They're like, oh, I don't want to use grams. Well, you can use ounces. Typically, if you use grams, you're going to save money. So don't be scared of it. It's not that hard to do. Once you know that 30 grams and an ounce are practically the same thing, you can start from there. And then you're just doing equal parts. So 30 and 30 or 40 and 40, you don't even have to think about translating it from ounces to grams. You just think about it as in numbers. So I think it's worth time to get comfortable with a scale and use a scale. And it's going to give you a lot better results and you're going to save money. So
Mhm.
Okay,
I
I'm sorry. Here's a question you can answer, you guys. This is from Deanne Moore. She wants to know, historically, we were taught to cover gray using 20 volume. Can we cover using 10 volume with its color? And what is the timing process?
I can answer that one. So, there's the 20 volume rule, and I would tell anybody that if they are covering gray to start with that, because you're not going to go wrong. But behind the chair, I have personally found that for a normal head of hair, I use 20 volume. For fine hair or a lower percentage of gray, and they don't want a lot of warmth in their formula, I will use 10 volume and I get great gray coverage. I will still leave it on 30 to 45 minutes to make sure that it really gets in there and oxidizes. And on the flip side, on super resistant coarse hair, I'll use 30 volume to really, blow open that cuticle and get the pigment in there. But also there again, 45 minutes. I will say that I do 5 to 8 colors a day, 5 to 6 days a week, and a big chunk of those are gray coverage. And typically I'll have to say 30, 35 minutes, and I do get 100% gray coverage that stays covered for the duration of 6 weeks. Um, there are those exceptions. I have a client that we have to use 30 volume on, and we leave it on an hour to get gray coverage. But in general, I'll have to say that its color covers gray better than any other manufacturer I've used, and I think I've pretty much used all of them. So,
And we also have taught you guys that the color boost, some of us have really resistant gray hair, and it doesn't matter what you try. So 2 parts color, 1 part 30 volume
mhm.
was one of the things we again, breaking rules, taught everybody.
Yeah, so with that, the way that I teach that, and it's pretty much the same thing, except I don't go all the way to half the developer, but our rules with its color, if you're going by the manual, and just so that you all know, on your swatch book right here, there's a QR code, and you can download your manual right into your phone. And the latest manual is always connected to it, so it's got great coverage information in there as well. But as far as how we teach based on manufacturer teaching the rules, 20 volume is going to cover 85% of your customers. And then when you have that resistant gray, you can go to 30 volume. Now, with the NNs, because they have that blue tilt, they're not going to look that much lighter, so it's not going to be much of a difference. Sometimes with the N series and you go to the 30 volume, you might want to drop a half a level with your color formulation because that 30 volume eats a little bit of that pigment up because it's stronger oxygen, and you may end up with a little bit lighter shade when you mix it with 30 volume than with 20. That's typically only with the N series though, because that N series has that gold tilt and already is going to look less opaque because the NN series has the blue tilt and the blue looks more opaque. So you don't usually have to do it as much with that NN series, and probably not with the NC series, although I don't use it that much I haven't been using it that much to let you know that for sure on that series. But then when we move into what Ann was talking about, the way that I teach it is once you've gone to 30 volume, I only teach them to drop developer out if they're using 30 volume, and you all might teach something different. But um, if I did it with 20 volume and then I dropped 5 or 10 grams of the developer out of the formula, I may not have enough oxygen to oxygenate or oxygenate all of those pigments that are in our color. So I prefer to go to the 30 volume, then drop your 5 or 10 grams out of your developer. And what you're doing is there's pigment in the tube and there's ammonia in the tube. So when we do equal parts with developer, we are diluting those, right? Well, when you do less developer and more color, you're not diluting the pigments and you're not diluting the ammonia. So you're getting a little higher ammonia level and you're getting a higher pigment level. Now, doing that with the 30 volume leaves you with enough oxygen to take care of, the oxygenation. But if you did that with 20 volume, you might actually lose some coverage, or some of those pigments are not getting um, oxidized.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'll have to say I've only had one person that I've had to do that on, and she was Middle Eastern and 80% gray.
I'm
And
one of them.
you know, she's a level 3 and we tried everything and we ended up using that formula and it covered beautifully. And it's the only thing that's ever covered her gray completely.
And it's rare for me to ever have to use any of those things either. I mean, part of that may be my application to speak to what Dustin talked about earlier. I do tend to put on a nice heavy, small sections, heavy coating. But sometimes I teach that technique also. If you're coming from a European color line and your client wants really opaque coverage, going to that can also help. Maybe you're getting gray coverage, but you want a real opaque kind of an old school European coverage. Dropping the developer with that 30 volume can help give you that more opaque finish.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, there's so many ways to get better gray coverage.
Yeah,
Every client, it's going to be a very individual, you know, case by case. You know, there's the people where you may need more alkalinity and have to add some blonding cream in and drop your color by a whole level. You
yeah,
know, I mean, it can be endless, but typically in general, I really do feel like its color covers beautifully if you're formulating properly with 20 volume. I mean,
right.
end of the day.
Well, we do
So
have more pigment in our color than most brands do
yeah,
too, which helps with that lower ammonia for the
yeah.
coverage.
So
All
the
Yeah.
right, we have a
lower.
question too.
Oh, okay, go ahead
Okay,
with the question.
so this is from Sandra. She says, "Hi, I love Artego for great coverage, especially 75 to 100% white. It is truly no fade, and that is why I love it most. I do a lot of level 7s. Do you have a perfect formula for a level 7 that does not end up super warm? Is it just 7NN or 8NN?"
So go ahead, Dustin. Go ahead.
I would say that depends on the texture of hair because I personally think the perfect 7N color is 7N and 10 volume for 45 minutes on medium to fine hair. And on coarser hair, I really like using half 7N and half 7NN and 20 volume. And I really do feel like it's a super balanced, true level 7. And, you know, I don't get fading with it. And I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. A lot of times on those higher percentages of gray, a level 7 tends to fade out super goldy, translucent, really ugly by the time they come back in. And I haven't found that with Artego.
How about with the new matte series?
Yes, I was going to talk about. So for me, probably everybody who's ever been in one of my classes knows I don't really like like I don't believe in formulas. Never have with any brand. The only place that I feel like a no-fail formula works is if it's 100% gray hair or if it's bleached hair, because you're working on the same tonality, but then you're still working on different textures of hair and all that. So it's really hard for me to want it to be like, okay, this is a set formula. You can use it every time and it's always going to be perfect. Now, I know we're talking about really high percentages of gray, and I feel a little more comfortable with that, of course. But what I've started doing is adding the CN series or NC series. At level 7, it's a CN series. So that's our matte series, and it's green. It's stronger green, I feel, than our NN series is tilted blue. So be careful with it. I use it with our NN series as an additive. And I learned this because my partner has probably about 90% gray hair. And when it first came out, I just wanted to see what it would do. And I put a 7CN on him. And he was like, "Why does my hair look like green sewage?" It's very green in those light
Avocado.
in those light shades. It will give a full-on green brown. So I don't use it by itself. In those levels, 6, 7 above, I typically don't use it by itself. I'm using it as an additive into my NN series to get some of that even more coolness in there if I don't want to go all the way to an ash. So I feel like if you played with the NNs and the CN in that level 7, and kind of went back, just add a little bit each time until you get it to where you love it, I think you'll see an even cooler, or anywhere from neutral to cooler finish. And that might be something you want to play around with. And then from there, you would move into your natural ashes and your ashes. And those natural ashes are also green tilted. So I feel like the CN makes more sense because you're keeping your full gray coverage. Whereas if you go to a natural ash, you're going to get a little less of that gray coverage typically. And then if you go to the ash, you're going straight with the blue based ash. So you're getting more blue. So it depends on what tonality you want. I'd probably try the CN and then go to the ash if I needed it even cooler than that.
I can also take that one step further because I do it a lot in the salon, is I actually like the chromatic shades mixed in with my, let's say I'm using 7NN. I will sometimes, well, not sometimes, a lot, I will add an inch of Galaxy or an inch of Forest into that formula to really keep it cool. Because sometimes I felt outside of the CN series, if you're mixing an A in there or an NA, it does dilute the pigment level. And I feel like you may not get as good a gray coverage, but by just adding in those pure pigments on top of your formula, you get that, cooler end result. But I have to say, like, no more than 1 inch for every 30 grams of color, or you may end up denim blue or forest green.
So I just tested out my stepdaughter and I just tested out all the colors on some swatches in those control shades, in the chromatic pulse shades. And even the on pre-lightened hair, even the Galaxy, it still was like a gray blue. So it wasn't like crazy bright. So it makes sense that those would give you a nice coverage, but not be too crazy if you're just putting an inch worth in that formula.
Mhm.
Okay, here's another question. We confused somebody. Okay, she said, I'm a bit confused about the formula when using 30 volume. Do you use less developer or a little bit lighter color than normal?
Well,
So let's
less
go back to that.
developer.
Yeah, less developer.
So if you're doing, let's give you an example. If I was working on a client and I was using 6NN, and I used 20 volume, and let's say maybe it covered, but it wasn't as opaque as I'd like it to be, I could go to 30 volume, and typically we teach you that you're going to get even more gray coverage with 30 volume. And because I'm using an NN, it's probably not going to look much lighter or anything. I don't have to change the formula. Um, at that point, if I want it more opaque than that, my next step would be to do the same thing, the 6NN and 30 volume, but I'm going to drop 5 or 10 grams out of the developer. So 30 grams of 6NN and 20 grams of my 30 volume instead of 30 grams. So I'm not going equal parts anymore. I'm doing less developer. And by doing the less developer, I'm keeping the ammonia level higher and the pigment level higher. It's not necessary very often, but if you want more opaque or you have a crazy resistant person, it is an option.
Any other questions that we need answered on its color before
Not
we
yet.
on?
We're doing good over here.
One thing you've mentioned that we didn't really talk about is it, and I've seen this being used this way a little bit more. I've always done the 30 volume and drop some developer out if I wanted extra alkalinity, but I've seen a lot more people doing the extra blonding creams. So you've got extra blonding cream neutral and extra blonding cream iris. The only difference is, of course, the iris is going to control some warmth for you. But people putting, a ribbon inch into their formula, when you do that, these have much higher alkalinity, more like a high lift level of alkalinity. So by putting a little bit of this into your bowl, you're raising the alkalinity. Now, if you put too much, of course, neutral has no pigments, so you're diluting your pigment dilute a little bit, and you're raising the alkalinity. With the iris, you're going to put back in some cooler pigment at the same time. But really, what this is doing, I always tell people, I'm like, well, it can never be us. These other brands can't be us. Not to speak about any specific brand, but they can't be us because they've got just enough dialogue to cover the gray and to do the work. When you start to try to dilute their alkalinity, you'd have to add more developer and you'd lose gray coverage. So they can never be high pigment, low ammonia like we are. But when we want to be high ammonia, we can do a lot of things to make that happen by dropping that 30 volume down, the developer level down, or by adding some extra blending cream. Now we just made our color more alkaline when we need it, which is very rare. So why are you using high alkalinity on every single client? That's what I never understood about these other brands. Why would I want to use that high alkalinity on every client when not every client needs it? Probably only maybe 10% or 5% of clients might need it. So for us, we're keeping the hair healthier. The color's not fading as fast because our alkalinity is lower. And then when I need my alkalinity higher, I add a little extra blending cream, maybe a ribbon inch into that color bowl, or I'll drop some 30 volume out of my formulation. Both those things raise the alkalinity.
All right, we have another question. How do you formulate for auburns, reds, coppers on resistant grays or almost 100% gray? She said, I wanted an auburn red / copper. Came out bright red, even though most of my formula was neutral.
Okay, well, typically my kind of go-to would be let's just say 20 grams of 7N, 20 grams, 10 grams of like 7-3, so you have some gold in there to balance it out, and then 10 grams of your red, copper, auburn shade. And usually I'll find that you get a really balanced natural auburn. I have a client that likes to be a 6'4", 6", and she's very, very resistant hair, and she's probably about 60% gray. And I do 20 grams of 6NN and 20 grams of 6'4", 6", and I process it for 45 minutes. And, at first I was a little worried that it would brown it out, but she truly matches the swatch of 6'4", 6", even with that NN in there. And it's 100% covered. I actually sent, Elisa, one of our reps, pictures afterwards, and, it was not browned out at all. So, that would be kind of my suggestion. And adding a little bit of gold in there, I think, kind of keeps the formula a little more balanced and retains a little bit more vibrancy than if you do 75% or even 50% of your N or NN series when you're trying to end up with a copper or an auburn result.
And I think that a lot of times, as hairdressers, we have so many things to think about when we're formulating. And I think a lot of times when we start thinking gray coverage, we're thinking pigment, alkalinity, all the things that cover gray. We've got our mindset on that, and we forget natural remaining pigment. Natural remaining pigment is still super important. So, if you were working on a client when that happened and you got that brighter result, if you're working on a client and you're taking her from, let's say you took her from a 5 to a level 7, and you were covering gray at the same time, your level 7, when you lifted her, added orange. So you probably needed very little copper in that formula, because the natural series with that orange would have been a soft, brown copper already before you even added the copper. So remembering that the end result of hair color is always what's in the tube of color and what's left from the natural pigment. Sometimes, when we all do it, like I said, we really focused on gray coverage and we forget our color theory.
I have a client and she's probably 70% gray and her natural level is a 4.5 and she wants to be an 8.34. And I literally use straight 8.3, keeping in mind that that residual pigment with 20 volume, and she ends up like an 8.34. And if you did 3 parts 8N, 1 part 8.4 or 8.34, she'd probably end up looking like Bozo the Clown, even with that small amount of copper in there. Especially with Artego, I feel like the reds are very, very, very pigmented. And the smallest amount when you're covering gray can tilt that formula, into Clarabelle the Clown if you're not careful.
And that leads me into our natural series. And just to make sure everybody understands this, in your swatch book right here is a visual representation of what tilt each of our natural series has as far as the base color tilt. So our natural series is tilted gold, right? Our natural series is tilted blue, and the new NC or CN series is tilted to a stronger green. So you have those all three of those series for your gray coverage. And I always teach people, think about which one of those series when you're formulating a color. And let's say I'm trying to make a copper. Well, if I don't want to brown that copper out too much, I'm going to definitely go to the N series because it's got a gold tilt. If I went to the N series, now I'm adding a blue tilted brown to my copper. And if I'm going for vibrancy, that's not the best choice. So thinking about that, the other thing that you could do, speaking to the last question, uh, typically I wouldn't teach you to put an NN into your copper formula, but if you're trying to get less vibrancy, then I don't believe there's rules that can't be broken as long as you know why you're doing it and you understand what you're doing. So you could go to the NN series, or you could put a little bit of NC in there, and that green's going to counteract it. But I still think you should think it through with the natural remaining pigment or residual pigment first. See if that helps you with that. If bringing down that copper's not, getting you where you want to be, then you could kind of play around with which N series you're using for your gray coverage.
Mhm.
And to speak to that, even our gold series covers gray very well. So if you're trying to, let's say you were trying to keep a fire engine red result, instead of going to an N series at all, but you need gray coverage, you can go to the gold series. And now you're not going to brown out that red even as much as an N series would. So, there again, we've got every kind of option for you.
Mhm. And it's going to be very case specific on which one you're going to do, depending on the end result that you want.
All right, here's another question from Don in Ohio. Do you recommend mixing the two shades together before adding developer? That's the first part. Part two is, do you recommend adding the NN series to the ashes, like 617181? Or is that too ashy?
I personally don't stir my colors up before adding the developer. I just mix really thoroughly for probably a minute just to make sure everything's emulsified. That's just how I do it. And I add the NNs to the ash series all the time for better gray coverage. It's kind
So
of one of the staples.
I'm kind of, I mean, I think I do it both ways. Honestly, I think I know from my history, because we were adding, in other brands that I was using, we were adding high pigment, like pure tones and things into our colors. We a lot of times would teach to mix the colors together so that you got that disbursement of those pigments. Now, if I'm putting in, you know, a brown with a slightly ash brown, I'm not as concerned and I might just throw it all in the bowl and I'm in a hurry at the color bowl. But if I'm putting like a blue additive into my color, I definitely go back to my old school way I was taught, and I put the colors in with that blue additive and then whisk that together before adding the developer so that I make sure that that blue gets dispersed evenly, because sometimes when you add the developer, those really strong pigments can kind of hide from your whisk, and you may have spots if it's a really strong pigment. But that's really the only thing I think about when I do that.
Mhm.
All right, here's a question from Sandra. Can you use straight NAs or 0.01s for gray coverage? I really love the neutral soft ash shades, but afraid to change on my long-term clients. I always do a mixture of 7N plus 7NA.
Well, I personally don't love the NAs for gray coverage because I feel like for whatever reason in my day today that they don't cover as, really anything over 30% gray. You get a very soft coverage. So my preference is to do like 7N and 7.1, or, 7N in one of the concentrates, or 7N, 7NC to get a cooler color, just because I found that's what works really well behind the chair. and I don't have any, you know, super translucent gray hairs popping through.
So I think thinking about that base color, and if you're trying to get more translucent, the 7.01s or the natural ashes might be a better choice if that's what you're liking about them. But just like Dustin said, adding an N to an ash, if you think about it, the N is gold tilted and then the ashes are blue. So you're getting a blue-green base by doing that. So it's a way to get a stronger coverage, but still have some green base if that's what you're looking for. But now we have the CN and NC series, which is already green tilted. So adding that into a natural or adding that to a natural. So just know that that gold tilted natural with an NC or CN is now going to be kind of a gold green base. So knowing those bases will help you manipulate and choose some formulas that you might like even better.
Very good.
Do we want to get into Beauty Fusion a little bit?
Sure. Do you have a Beauty Fusion swatch book?
I do, it's right here.
Will you hold up the I don't have mine with me. The color wheel? And we'll go into, of course, all the color rules and everything, but
Hold on one sec, I pulled it out.
okay. Yeah, he uses the color wheel. Everybody should be using that color wheel.
For sure.
Good information. And we didn't really talk about the answer to that one question. I don't think ask if it was too ashy to add the naturals to the or the NNs to the ashes.
Yeah.
I don't believe that anything's too ash if that is going to give you the result you're looking for. So do I do it all the time? Yeah. If I have a client who's going to pull their natural remaining pigment's going to be straight up orange, heck yes, and I need gray coverage, I'd do an NN with an ash 100 times over. No problem.
Sebastian, can
Yeah.
you hear me?
Yeah.
So I'm a level 5 dinosaur hair. I'm very coarse, and I try to shift my base up and soften it slightly. And I use an 8NN and an 811 with 30 volume to
Absolutely.
get coverage and control
The
that warmth.
warmth.
So it's that math problem. Yes.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
have any problem mixing the strongest ashes if you need it. Whatever
Yep.
gets you what you need, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and I'm just saying that don't be afraid of it. Now I only have about maybe 15% in my widow's peak of gray, but I just think if you don't try it, you got to be experimental with Artego. Its color, it's a great line to move around with, and you
Yep.
you shouldn't be afraid of it.
It's definitely one of the beauties of our brand is that you
Yes.
can do so much with it. Now one thing that with the ashes and the double ashes, I always tell people, look at our swatch book. If you're starting with our color and you've not been using it, believe the swatch book. If a 6NN looks slightly darker than a 6N in the swatch book, it is.
Yes.
If a
Yes.
6 ash looks like a 5 natural as far as level, it is because there's so much blue in our ashes. So I've had people, start using our color and put a 6 ash on somebody and call me and say, hey, it looks like a 4. And I'm like, well, hold the 6 ash swatch close to her head and see if it doesn't match. And then they're like, well, it does look like it. I'm like, you need to look at your swatches. You can't just
It's that
assume.
level of saturation. I
Yeah.
think that's where the word, it's blue, absorbs light, and then
Yep.
it's saturated. So you just have to. Plus, most people are working in fluorescent lighting, which they shouldn't, but they do, and that makes a play too, because then we have the old adage of take them outside. Then you'll see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so Beauty Fusion. You wanted me to hold up the color wheel?
Yeah, so if you look inside your Beauty Fusion color wheel, inside your swatch book, this color wheel is in there. All of our brands have color wheels with them. Always use them. They tell you all the base information that you need. If you notice all the colors in the middle where the brown is, all those colors have had extra brown added to them for coverage. So if you're looking for gray coverage, the easy thing to do is just look at the series that are in that brown area, and you know that they cover gray.
Perfect. So Beauty Fusion is a little tricky, I'll have to say, for everybody to use. And there's quite a few options for gray coverage in Beauty Fusion. And I guess it would be more of what end result you're trying to get. I know that the Demi Plus, if you're not trying to get a lot of warmth with the 13 volume, will cover almost every client amazingly well. I work with a stylist that uses Beauty Fusion every day. That's her color line that she uses as a standalone. She doesn't use its color. Most of her clients are 60 plus gray. And she uses Beauty Fusion and gets the most beautiful gray coverage, period, all day long with it. Some of the little tips I'll have to say with that for mixing. I know I have a lot of people that complain about the mixing and it being chunky and splotchy with the booster added in. And we have found that if you get a shaker, I mean, this one happens to be L'Oreal, we're able to just put all 3 ingredients, the booster, the liquid color, and the developer. And if you shake it for about 30 seconds, you get the best consistency ever that doesn't have lumps, bumps, chunks, and all of
And
that
I
happen.
typically mix the booster and the developer first and then add in the color. And I find if I'm doing it with a whisk, because I don't have shakers, I never came from a brand with a shaker, so I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a speed of application. I throw it on the scale, screw the top on, shake it up, and I don't have to sit there and blend booster and developer, because that's what you really do need to do. I've watched a couple other stylists that kind of half-ass stick it all together and stir it up. And you're either going to be there for 20 minutes stirring it, or you're going to have chunks of booster and all kinds of crazy stuff can, happen.
Hi, Dustin, somebody's asking you to hold up the color wheel
Oh.
again.
Let's see here. Can everybody see that?
So your
Hi.
main series in Beauty Fusion for gray coverage, of course, will be your N series, which is slightly tilted green, just very, very slightly, not much. Your gold series, and then your chocolate series, and all 3 of those series fall in that brown area. And then there are a few sprinkled other colors in there that also fall in that brown area.
All right, here's a question. I switched to Beauty Fusion last year and I love it. I use this mostly for gray coverage. However, every now and then I feel it grabs darker on my client when it didn't the time before. Do you know what could cause that? I am meticulous about mixing it until it's creamy.
Okay, so well, I guess I would need one answer. If you're using booster 1 and level 6 and above, or if you're using booster 2 like the manual suggests, because as we found out, there is a difference in alkalinity. And I know that a lot of people were taught that they were the same, and using booster 1 for all of your applications would work. And since I've found out that there is a difference and tested them, I used to notice that my 6, 7, 8, 9 even was very, very pigmented, and they are, but they're also heavily pigmented to accommodate the booster 2 being more alkaline. So that would probably be the first thing I would do, is switch. If you're not using booster 2 and you're 7, 8, 9 levels, to start using booster 2. And I feel like that really compensates for that extra dilute of pigment. And I will say, in general, Beauty Fusion is very saturated. So, adjusting your formula, half a level lighter. Also, you can add, actually, frankly, a tiny little bit more booster in there if you need it for more resistant hair, or if you feel like that dilute's too heavy.
And
Okay.
Anne, can you find out, or whoever asked the question, if you can reply to this? Are you seeing the darkness on the refreshed mids and ends, or are you seeing it be
Okay.
darker on the new growth when you're touching it up?
Right.
All right, it's Jennifer. Can you send that answer to us?
Mhm.
Also, Sebastian and Dustin, in Italy, when you do your training, they talk a lot about, in Italian, porosity. You know, it's a big thing, the porosity of the hair, and how when something's heavily pigmented, how it might attach.
Mhm.
Yeah,
All right,
absolutely.
Jennifer says, hang on, guys, I'm trying to get this thing to work here. I didn't have my regular, my, what do you call it, wireless mouse. All right, she says, I do follow the correct booster for which level I'm using, but I just did a client. Here's the formula. 20 grams of 10N, 10 grams of 10G, booster 2, and it came out almost a level 8.5 to 9, and she is 100% gray. Her new growth, I don't ever pull her color. That was just on the new growth. She doesn't pull
Okay.
her through.
Okay, so the new growth actually looked darker this time than the times before.
Yes, that's what she's saying.
So, I mean, Melanie that I work with is very, very gray, and we kind of struggled with this in the beginning when she first started using Beauty Fusion. And I just have to say, those lighter levels are very pigmented. So you may have to adjust, add some 12O into that formula, like maybe 10 grams 12O, 10 grams 10N, 10 grams 10G, and start with that. You could also, depending on the line you were using before, a lot of level 10s have a definitely higher amount of alkalinity in them. And with Beauty Fusion, the beauty is you can control your alkalinity. And so I feel like also possibly adding in an extra 1 or 2 grams of booster 2 will compensate for, that extra pigment in the Beauty Fusion.
Yeah, I think that would be a good.
Adding clear. Would clear make any difference? Diluted lighter?
It would dilute it. Also, so but going for the gray coverage, I think if you're not going to have any trouble covering her gray and she's easily covered, the clear would be a good answer. If I think Dustin's answer, if the client was a hard to cover client, might be even better for that situation.
Okay.
Just that little bit of extra alkalinity, because the alkalinity eats pigment. It doesn't it it doesn't know the difference between natural pigment and the pigment in the tube of color. So when you put a little extra alkalinity in there, it's going to eat some of the pigment and dilute it for you, while keeping the hair open. So you've got lots of options. I mean, he talked about the level 12, which would keep your alkalinity a little bit higher too, possibly. But the only thing with the clear is you would still want to add your booster to the same level, because of course, clear doesn't have any alkalinity in it.
So I just saw a message from Elizabeth, who's switching from L'Oreal, which I'm very familiar with because I worked for them for a long time. So I just put my phone number in the chat box, and you can feel free to call me or text me with questions, because that's a really broad question. Just in general, switching from L'Oreal, but I'm more than willing to, talk to you, and I have lots of great tips and tricks for switching from L'Oreal and Anoa over to Artego, because I've personally done it. So
All right, going back to the original question with where you said to add the 12, she said if she adds level 12, does she still use 20 volume?
yes.
Okay.
Because now remember, in the Beauty Fusion, there is no alkalinity in the bottles. So you're not going to reduce the amount of alkalinity or your booster. And it's not like it's not like we're using now in its color, we'd be using a high lift if we use a 12, but in Beauty Fusion, it could be
just a 12.
It's just a 12. It doesn't have alkalinity in it.
That's her next question. She's asking, are the level 12s considered high lift tint? Could I put that on her dark roots and get a bit of lift out of that? I know color doesn't lift color, but trying to bend the rules.
So you make Beauty Fusion what you want it to be. So if you use Beauty Fusion 12 with 5 volume, there's no alkalinity and it is a gloss. If you use it with 10% booster, it's now a demi. If you use it with 20% booster, it's now permanent. If you use that 12 with 30% booster, 30% to the color amount, it is now a high lift. So that 12 is not a high lift until you make it a high lift.
Lift, right?
And if you're trying to lift out a little bit of like over deposited pigment, there's a really great formula with Beauty Fusion, which would be 1 ounce of clear, 2 ounces of 30 volume, and what would that be? 6 grams of booster 2. And you can apply that to damp hair for 5 to 10 minutes, and it should, maybe up to 15, should bump out some of that dark pigment on that client and ended up like a 8.5, 9, and lift her up to the 10 that you want. It's like a little quick correction.
It's kind of like making extra blonding cream in its color.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that would also work very well. You know, even if you're using Beauty Fusion, I still think there's a few key tools in its color you should have in your toolbox. And, you know, that would be blonding cream is a big one. Also, those NN series, just for those really extra resistant, you know, clients that you may have come in, and also maybe supplementing your reds a little bit, just because the variety of reds and its color is outstanding. But anyway, extra
All right,
blonde.
two things, two questions. All right, somebody wanted you to repeat that formula. So I wrote it down. 1 ounce of clear, 2 ounces 30 volume, 6 grams of booster 2, apply the damp hair. And for how long?
I mean, you're gonna have to watch it. I would put it on quickly. I would say anywhere between 5, 15, possibly 20 minutes. You're just gonna look for like that visual correction.
Okay.
I wouldn't probably go longer than 20 minutes because I feel like you're gonna expose a lot of warmth, you
Okay.
know, and not end up with the greatest color.
Yeah. And then
Okay.
I saw the next question was,
right.
can you do that with its color? And in its color, extra blonding cream clear neutral or extra blonding cream iris, both will lift artificial pigment up to 2 levels. So absolutely, you can use them to clear out some pigment if you need to, with either double 30 volume or double 40 volume, depending on how much you need to clear out.
Perfect. Any-
Also too, I know that I see a lot of people that the hairline gets darker when they're covering gray. So 2 things you can do. I personally always do 1 level lighter on the hairline. Like I will mix up 5 grams of 8NN and 5 grams of 20 volume. And I will literally do the hairline first and maybe go back, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch, and then do the 7NN everywhere else, just because I think it grows out softer on the hairline. It also kind of elevates your service. You know, everyone else just slaps 7NN all over. And I feel like my clients come back and go, oh, it grew out really nice around my face. And you really don't notice a huge difference going that level lighter. It's not like they have a big stripe around their hairline of a level lighter. It's just that tiny little bit softer. Also, if you do have a client that grabs on the hairline, that extra blonding cream and double 30 volume at the shampoo bowl around the hairline, if you get really dark, is amazing. And it usually will pull out that extra pigment in 5-10 minutes at the longest.
Something weaker than that option, if you just need a little tonality lift too, while we're on the subject, Dream Repair pre shampoo. The pre shampoo is high in alkalinity, so you don't retail it to anyone. It's only in a liter size and it's only for back bar. I love to keep it on the back bar because if you ever get too much tone in a blonde or just a little too much tone in anything, a couple lathers with it, or at the worst case scenario, lather it into the hair, put them under the dryer for 5 minutes, and then rinse it. And you didn't have to mix up anything super crazy alkaline, but it will bump a little pigment out of the hair for you. And so it's a nice back bar item to keep
Very
on
good.
hand.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get some.
It's awesome. You'll like it. Especially it's more for me for blondes. Like if I get a blonde and I make her a little ashy and she doesn't want to be, doesn't want to wait 2 days for it to soften off, it's a nice, easy way to fix that for her if she has an event that night or something like that. But the last tip for gray coverage I have that we taught in Italy, when I was doing my training with Artego at the beginning, is I had one client in my whole career that I couldn't get gray coverage on 5 hairs. She had 3 hairs on this side of her head and 2 on this side, and they were right in the hairline, and they were thicker than the rest of her entire hair texture. It was weird. They were like almost, I don't know, it was just very hard, rough hairs, and they just wouldn't cover, and they just shine, really strongly right in her hairline. So if you take pretty much this will work with any color, but if you take one level lighter and one tone warmer. So if you're doing a neutral level 6, you would go to a 7 gold. And you take that straight from the tube, wipe that only on the hairs that you're having trouble coverage if you ever have this issue. Or, it could be a whole section if there's a section that won't cover ever, but typically it's going to be like a few stray hairs possibly if it's this situation. But you wipe that onto those hairs, go to the back, mix your color up. By the time you get to the front, you wipe the excess off and just do your application. And that is going to pre-soften and pre-pigment with some warmer tone into those white hairs. And it covered great from that point on. It would be a little harder with Beauty Fusion because with Beauty Fusion, you'd have to mix your booster into your color and not put developer in it. So that might be a little challenging, but with its color, it's very simple to do. That little tiny bit of color, one level lighter, one tone warmer, wipe it on those hairs, and then wipe it off before you start your application. By the time you've mixed your color, that's all it needed.
I also find that people really do complain about just the hairline not covering. And another thing that we do is take perm papers, because I feel like everybody's got those really crazy
Pop out.
want to pop out. And it doesn't matter how much color you put on there, they're popping straight out. So we lay perm papers around the hairline, just to really keep those little hairs like submerged in color for the whole processing time. And that really helps. And Sebastian's trick of pre-pigmenting, you're always going to have that one client that it doesn't matter. And it's, of course, always on their hairline. And, doing the pre-pigment trick really does make a huge difference on those clients.
Very good. Well, it's 11:02, guys.
Okay.
So we want to thank everybody for coming and tell you that if you want to rewatch this or have friends who need to watch it, it will be on YouTube very quickly. So you can rewatch it there. Join us on our next one.
Thanks for letting me be the masculine and Valentine today.
You did a great job, Ann. Thank you, Dustin. We really appreciate it. Great job,
Okay.
guys.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye, Dustin. Bye, everybody.
Bye.